How's everybody doing? Awesome. Welcome back. I know you're really excited to be back to work, just as excited as the kids are to get back to school. Right? So neurodiversity is a relatively new term in the world of psychology, and I'm wondering if there's anybody in the room, aside from Emily, who is familiar with the term neurodiversity and what it means. I see no hands. So this is concerning, but also very exciting for me. So again, my name is Sean Smith. I'm the founder and CEO of Don't Diss My Ability. I am a psychotherapist and Canadian certified counselor by trade. I'm also the provincial representative, or what's the word we're using now? The delegate for the province of New Brunswick for the CCPA. And I do a lot of different things. I'm a national award-winning entrepreneur, Canada's entrepreneurship icon. I'm a media personality. I've been featured on CBC, CTV. I'm an expert panelist. I'm an expert in a lot of different areas, a lot of things disability, but one of them is disability-related startups and advocacy. I'm a public speaker. Although I'm not an alumni of Oasis, I'm a firm believer in giving back to community. I spend a lot of my time volunteering, particularly with other entrepreneurs to help them with different aspects of their business. And I'm very proud to have partnered and to be a mentor through NBCC Oasis, which is a wonderful program. I'm also an innovator. I like to do things a little bit different. So I have a very unique understanding of how my thought process works. So I do a lot of different things that stimulate my mind. So this is a community arcade that I'm working on. My office is located at the Ville Cooperative in Fredericton, New Brunswick. Has everybody heard of the Ville before? Crickets. Y'all need to get there. So the Ville Cooperative is an old elementary school that our government shut down, and somebody bought it and turned it into a social enterprise. So there are a lot of different social entrepreneurs there and a lot of different eclectic groups with the goal of giving back to community. I'm also a podcaster. I'm a blogger and vlogger for an organization called Different Brains. And I'm also an amateur chef and chocolatier. Maybe I should leave that on for a minute. And so all of these things are great, but what I really want to hit home is why I am the way that I am and why I'm able to do all of these things. I was diagnosed with ADHD and attentive type at age 30. Prior to my diagnosis, it took me 4 years to finish 3 years of high school, 32 attempts to earn 18 credits required to graduate. I failed grade 10 math 4 times. If you had asked my parents which one of me or my siblings would have gone to post-secondary, it would have been my brother, my sister, the cat, the dog, and then me. My parents own a $1 million landscaping and snow removal company, and they actually built a branch of it thinking, what the hell are we going to do with Sean? The irony is now my brother runs that. Yeah, I can say that proudly. But you can imagine what it's like, you know, having lived most of my life wondering what was wrong with me, only to stumble into what was actually right with me. So for 30 years of my life, I like to joke I was fat, lazy, and dumb. Now I'm fat, lazy, and smart, and people don't know what to think of me. Right? But you can imagine the extreme anxiety and depression that I experienced. No matter how much I tried, my efforts were never reflected in any type of academic work. I tied my shoes the wrong way before I tied them the right way every time. I grew up in golf, you know, on the golf course in the hockey rinks. And although I love those sports, one of the things that, you know, we all kind of take for granted as kids and as people, when you want to buy something, you go to the canteen, you go to pull out that change and you go to pay for it. I couldn't count. It was as though I would start and somebody would erase that process from my memory. Has everybody ever seen Men in Black? Where they do the shh and it blanks out the person's memory? This is kind of what it was like for me. Any type of stimuli was like somebody flicked that switch. And I would automatically forget everything that I was doing, to the point I would get so pissed off. I would put the change back in my pocket and I'd walk away. And I wouldn't go up to the cash to pay for anything because I didn't want to feel like a dummy. And so I actually learned to count at the ripe age of 24. My wife, well, girlfriend at the time, now wife, decided to move to Lake Tahoe, of all places. I don't know if anybody's ever been, but this is where the rich and famous go to play in the summer. This is where Michael Jordan has his celebrity golf tournament. And I did not, and so I ended up getting a job as a blackjack dealer, a job I did not want. I didn't play board games. I couldn't remember the rules. But because I was the English-speaking Canuck, they kind of pushed me into it. About 2,000 Polish people migrate to Lake Tahoe every summer to account for their busy tourist season. And if anybody's ever been gambling to the casino, you know the number one reason to be there is to forget why you're there in the first place, which is to lose your money. And if you have a conversation with somebody who doesn't speak fluent English, you're likely going to move on. So they push me and they push me and they push me. And I'm so thankful that they did, because that's how I learned to count. I had something tactile to manipulate. And because I had something in front of me with the numbers on it, I could then do the mental math, but I couldn't do it before. So I challenge you, how is it that a pit boss with no formal education in teaching could teach me how to count, but all of the math teachers that I had, and countless tutors who were also math teachers, could not? So before I was diagnosed, this was my first kind of inkling that I wasn't dumb, I'm actually kind of smart. And I actually developed my mantra from this experience, which is, don't diss my ability. I may not learn in a conventional manner, but that doesn't mean I can't learn, only that you've not been able to reach me. So when a student fails grade 10 math 4 times, that's not on the student. That's on the teachers, that's on the system. How is it that someone like me can slip through the cracks for as long as I did and not get the help that I needed? Well, because I didn't have behavioral issues. I learned to cope. Teachers ask the question, do you understand? Oh yeah. Yeah, right? Because who wants to be called out and look like a dummy and embarrassed in front of their class? No one. But the reason why I learned to count was because the context was there. And I know enough about myself now that in order for me to learn something or master it, I have to be able to contextualize it. And this is how I've been able to teach myself all of these different skill sets that I showed you before. I don't need to be told what to do, I need to be shown. That's how I learn. And understanding that, I've been able to master a lot of different things. Now, when I was diagnosed, I was in the Northwest Territories of all places. Fort Smith, population 2,500, they do things a little bit differently there. I actually got a script for Ritalin before I had an assessment. And the best way for me to describe what happened in my head when I started taking Ritalin, if you can imagine an old antique truck that you find in a barn somewhere, and you want to fix it up. So you pop the hood, you swap out the spark plug, change the oil and the gas, turn over the key. You see the engine start to rumble, you can see the flakes of rust start to chip and fall off. That's what happened in my head. All of a sudden, things I couldn't do, I could now do with relative ease. It was uncanny. I could literally process my thoughts and emotions in ways that I never could before. Or as I like to say to my wife, sometimes I'm right now. But I learned a lot about myself in the process. And so I did, despite my high school grades, I did go to post-secondary. I started playing football my first year of grade 12. By my second year, I was an all-star, and as an all-star, you get a recruiting package from every major Canadian university with a football team. I'll never forget, it was such a high and then such a low. I couldn't go to any of those schools. Fortunate for me, John Abbott College, a cégep in the West Island of Montreal, started recruiting at a province for the first time in the school's history. The head registrar just also happened to be the defensive coordinator, and they snuck me in. It took me 3 years to finish a 2-year program, but I did it. My parents got tired of funding my football career, so they shipped me back home. I went to St. Thomas, and I graduated with a whopping 2.3 GPA. It took me 4 years to finish what should have been 3. Just squeaked by. A ton of life experience. This is currently my 20th job. But I decided at the ripe age of 30, when things started working a little bit differently, that I was going to go back to school. I went back to upgrade as a mature student, taking 5 classes, earned a new GPA of 3.7. So to have gone from a 2.3 to a 3.7 was just incredible. It was validation, right? And so I applied to the Masters of Education in Counseling Psych and was accepted in 2010. Graduated at the top of my class, but I got in on academic probation. I hadn't even gotten in, they were already looking to get me out. Right? But again, further validation that I was on the right track. I like to tell people that I don't have answers, I only have perspectives to share. Anybody, when it comes to inclusion, one of the biggest mistakes people make, well, I'll actually backtrack and say, inclusion is a product that's been packaged and sold by people without disabilities for people with disabilities. And I compare a lot of what happens to fad diets. When a fad diet doesn't work out, do you blame the author? No. You blame yourself. So if we take this one step further, we compare it to what's happening with parenting experts, of which I am one. But again, I tell people I don't have answers, only perspectives to share. So when people go through and they read these books to help their children who are uniquely gifted, who are neurodiverse, which would mean that they're either on the autism spectrum, Asperger's, ADHD, or another learning disability, when things don't work out, they blame themselves, they internalize that, and then that comes out through their child. So having ADHD and understanding how my thought process works means that I have a different lens through which to view the world. And I truly believe the difference between thinking and knowing is experience. We have too many people who think they know, but lack the practical experience to be credible. If we need to teach our kids about inclusion, it means we've already taught them how to exclude. Every kid grows up an artist until some adult convinces them they're not. A disability is now thought of as a broken part of a machine that once identified could be fixed. But the problem is, we're not machines, we're people. We don't need fixing, we need nurturing. One of the challenges with inclusion is that if we're trying to get students, kids, people with disabilities to be more like people without disabilities, that's actually assimilation. Now, I know this through, every day we ask these kids to go to school and they're not able to do the work through no fault of their own. We are asking them to openly, willingly humiliate themselves on a daily basis. We have kids who are coming up without being assessed. And even if they are assessed, what are we assessing for? I have the benefit of having experience on both sides. I've had 2 assessments done personally, and when I went back to do my master's degree, I learned how to perform some of the assessment tools. So what are we assessing for? Deficits. If all we're looking for is what's wrong, how could these kids ever do anything right? I have refused to work under a psychologist because I've worked with too many who've gone from school to school to school to work, who've never actually had to implement any of the recommendations that they've ever put on paper for parents to complete or for the schools to work through. They're not practical. In most cases, they're copy and paste. They don't work. And this is the challenge, is that parents go home and they're going to try these things with their kids, and how is that child going to feel when they can't meet the expectations that were unrealistic to begin with? And so what I find in my work is that I know that I have unique gifts. And when someone walks through my door and they disclose that they have an invisible disability, the first thing I say is, welcome to the world of the uniquely gifted. And what I'm finding is that these kids are actually uniquely gifted. They learn in different ways that may not be conventional in a classroom setting, but they are gifted. And it's not to say that we don't have challenges, we absolutely do. But neurodiversity represents a group of individuals with a disability label, but for whom the term disability doesn't quite fit, because our assets exceed our deficits. But the challenge is society focuses on our deficits. I use the analogy of the square peg in the round hole since the beginning of time, and this is well documented, and it's still happening today. All of our time, energy, and resources have gone into changing that square peg, which represents the individual with the disability. We're still doing it today. That peg is not going to fit. It will not fit. So I describe my work as expanding that round hole until people acknowledge and understand that we have these unique gifts and stop focusing on the things we can't do and focus on the things that we can. We're going to be stuck in this system, this way of doing things. and it's backwards. But this is the way things have always been. So how do we change them? Well, for me, it's by being the example. I have a lot of different unique gifts. One of them is I can walk in a room, structurally I can tell you everything that's off. It's a gift and a curse. I can actually do the same thing with people. Within moments of observing or talking to someone, I know how authentic and genuine they are. I see a lot of people being very nervous right now. I won't put anybody out. But one of the challenges of being neurodiverse and being gifted is understanding that it's a very lonely place. When you think of somebody with a physical disability or a mobility impairment, you can spot somebody who may be in a wheelchair. Or there are symbols when you go to, say, U&B, you look at the parking lot, there's going to be the handicap symbol for parking. There's going to be symbols on the automated button at the door. Little symbols everywhere that you go. But for somebody with an invisible disability, everybody looks like you, but nobody is like you. And the only way to find someone who is like you is to be vulnerable and open up and have a conversation. But that conversation usually has the opposite intended effect. Rather than drawing closer to someone, you actually pull a little bit further away because you realize how much more alone you actually are. I typically work with parents and not the kids. Because the kids are awesome. It's the parents who need help. I like to say that, each generation vows to do something a little bit different. Our generation of parents were maybe a little too heavy-handed. The next generation learned not to do that, but there was nothing for them to learn in the absence. What do we do? So one parenting approach was not to really do anything. So we have a group of parents with kids who are now becoming adults, who are also becoming prisoners in their own home. Because they haven't taught their kids the value of a dollar, the value of work. Everything's been handed to them. And the expectation that, I'll put it bluntly, every time they fart, somebody's going to clap for them. And these are the students that you're getting, which is a shame, right? They've been coddled. We are all going to have challenges, but if we're not going to teach these kids basic life skills, we're not doing anybody any service, right? So a big part of my work is trying to empower people to think differently. And it all starts for me by asking an individual what their gift is. Everyone else has tried to fixate and focus on what is perceived to be wrong with the person. When they come through my door, it's not about what's wrong with you, it's about starting with what's right with you. Using their passion, their interest as the context for communication. And this is why I've had the success that I've had. If someone is into Pokemon, even though I'm not a fan, then that's what we're going to use. And it can be used for a lot of different things. I use my son as an example. He loves Pokemon. I hate them. I hope I really never see them again. I hope it's a phase. But he taught himself how to read and how to count. I mean, he is uniquely gifted. But for these kids who are uniquely gifted, a lot of times because it's not recognized, they end up having behavioral issues. And then they're seen as sleep disturbers, right? He's going into grade 4. He knows every answer to the question the teacher's going to ask, and he hasn't even started school yet. But when the teacher asks 5 other people before him, he's impulsive and he'll blurt it out. And if he does that too many times, we get a call, and then we sit down, we have a conversation with the teacher, and we politely put it this way, so he's being faulted for being too smart. So I know through my work with community living that there is a program for special admissions. But one of the things I challenge NBCC and other post-secondary education institutions to think about is what do we have for enrichment and what do we have for gifted students? In application processes, especially when it comes to human resources, and I'm going to go one step further and say that it applies to post-secondary educational institutions as well, is that yes, we're screening to keep people in, or to get people in, but we're also in a way screening people out. The question, what is your gift, is one that I've actually included in my intake forms for counseling. Why isn't that something that we're all asking? Everybody has a unique gift, most people. I stumbled into mine when I was 30 and I'm still stumbling onto them. But if all we're focusing on is what people can do and what we can teach them, we're kind of missing the boat. I think as adults, sometimes we need to take a step back and understand that maybe we have something to learn too. There are a lot of parents that I work with where their kids are not in school. And the Department of Education, they're in social development, their goal is to get these kids back in school. And I say, no, I understand why they don't want to go back to school. They either are assessed or they're not assessed. They don't have the supports that they need. And even if they said they did, I don't know who could do them. Because the thing about inclusion is that there's no one size fits all. It's custom, tailor-made to the individual. And right now, I'm the only person I know who's actually doing this. Because there is no one size fits all. If you think that there's one program that's going to help everybody with ADHD or everybody on the autism spectrum, it's just not going to happen. But not everybody is as fortunate as me. I've been able to move. This is my Throwback Thursday pick, by the way. My wife calls it the Uncle Fester pick. One of the challenges of people with disabilities is that they're not likely to relocate. So the experiences that they have are going to be in one place. So how do we get them out? How do we get them to do different things? Well, again, for me, it's about being a tangible example, being the example. Does anybody know who Temple Grandin is?
Yeah.
A few people? Okay. So Temple Grandin is, she's on the autism spectrum. She has her PhD in animal science. And if you've eaten a hamburger in the last 25, 30 years, I would say there's probably a 95% chance it came from a shoot that she designed. She revolutionized the cattle industry and how cows are slaughtered around the world. But neurodiversity is a big movement. This is not a little thing that happens. And because I've been able to use my gifts of social media to broadcast and promote what I'm doing, I get to meet a lot of incredible people. This is Steve Rohr. You likely haven't heard from him or heard about him. He is the show publicist for the Oscars and one of my advisors. He helps me prepare for speeches and interviews. This is Eileen Gruba. She's one of my first celebrity brand ambassadors. She's been on Sons of Anarchy, Nip Tuck, Monk, CSI Miami. And this is me with Temple and Eileen in Florida last year. Florida and California seem to be the largest spaces where neurodiversity is taking off. And for those of you who haven't heard of Temple, I would encourage you to check out her movie. Claire Danes played her role in her biopic movie. But one of the things that I tell people is that although I wouldn't wish my experiences on anyone, I also wouldn't trade them for the world. You can't get from A to C without going through B. And the reality is that no one ever said being awesome would be easy. There's a toll. But part of what I think we can do is to help ease that toll for people. It doesn't have to be that hard to be understanding. The challenge with an invisible disability is that, unfortunately, we want to see somebody suffering in order to contextualize and understand and empathize. Everybody talks about taking a mental health day until that person takes a mental health day. And you can't leave your house because, heaven forbid, somebody saw you out doing something. But that's none of their business. So I actually talk openly about my mental health days. I go home and I cook. That's what I do. If you judge me, it says a lot more about you than it does me. Right? But it's the mentality and the perception of, oh, somebody's taking advantage, when that's not actually the case. So I leave you with neurodiversity is big business, people. This is not something that is kind of a small potatoes movement. Like this is something that's taking the world by storm. It's coming up in film and television. Large corporations and companies are acknowledging the unique gifts of individuals who are neurodiverse. This is Margot Jaffe. Margot found me about 3.5 years ago when she was the head of video and marketing production for a little company called Yahoo. Verizon bought Yahoo, and now she has created a new brand through Verizon called Oath, and she's a global lead of the Neurodiversity Employment Resource Group. Has anybody heard of SAP? They're one of the largest software manufacturing companies in the world, and they have an autism at work program where they are identifying the unique gifts of these individuals and putting them to work because they realize that their gifts are an asset within their business. Is anybody familiar with The Mighty?
Yeah.
The Mighty has more than 1 million likes on Facebook, and it's a mental health platform for people to go and share their stories and positive stories. And these are all people that I've interviewed, but nobody knows that I'm here. My market, my following is Florida, California, and the UK. Entrepreneurship is something that's near and dear to me and something I believe in. And so one of the people I've been able to connect with is Amy Cosper, the former editor-in-chief of Entrepreneur Magazine. And what I love about this is that I didn't find these people, they found me. I've got about 4,000 followers on Twitter. My 4,000 followers have close to 100 million. Anybody watch Storage Wars? Dan and Laura follow me, they retweet some of my stuff for me. Everybody knows somebody with a disability. Statistically, it's impossible not to. And if anybody claims that they don't, if it was my gig, I'd invite them to leave because it would only be out of sheer ignorance. And that's the reality. And so as I mentioned, Florida is really where I seem to have taken off. My next speaking engagement is as a guest lecturer at the University of Miami. So I'm excited to be here and speaking to all of you because this will be my third trip to Florida in just as many years. But I've not been invited to speak at my alma mater of UNB or John Abbott College, but I'm here with you at NBCC. So I'm very excited to be here. Does anybody have any questions for me?
Sure. So, how would I, first off, I don't consider myself a teacher. I'm an engineer who teaches engineering courses. So how would I recognize somebody learns differently? And then what do I do? I don't know what to look. Well, let's say something.
Well, and that's part of the challenge is that there's no book, there's no guideline, right? It's.
So I guess my question is, how do I know they're just not being lazy, or they learn differently? Or I just don't know how to do that. Again, it's tricky. So in my head, I go through a series of questions, and I guess one of the ways I'll answer that is with a story. So a mother got in touch with me about her daughter who has gone to community college. I don't know which campus. She's gone to the College of Craft and Design. She's flunked out of post-secondary, I think, 2 or 3 times. Okay, and in my conversation with the daughter who would come to see me, she would say, Mom always called me a fussy eater. Okay, why? Well, because I wouldn't eat things like store-bought bread. Okay, why don't you eat store-bought bread? Well, I can taste the chemicals. That's really interesting. So I flip it upside down. I don't see that as a picky eater. Okay, so if you can taste the chemicals in that, what other chemicals do you taste in what other foods? So does that make her a fussy eater, or does that mean she has a very unique palate? So then I contact a friend of mine who's a chef. Holy shit, Sean. There's actually, Starbucks and Ben & Jerry's have people called flavor gurus. Every food industry has an expert who tastes the food, who are looking for somebody just like her. She's on social assistance for the 3rd time. So I'm working with the chef to try and come up with something that's never been done before, to try and determine, is this actually a gift? Right? So again, there's no formula. It really comes down to being able to ask questions and not looking at it from a perspective of judgment of, is this person lazy or are they a genius? It's a tricky type of thing that's not going to come up in an assessment, because in the assessments that we've done, and I tell people, if their child has a psychoeducational assessment, please bring it to me, because while we're assessing for deficits, I look at that one thing that they didn't brush over because there wasn't something that was wrong with them. And I take that one thing and I turn it into everything. So there is no way to look and know, or, you know, there's no simple process. It's a series of questions that I've just been able to kind of tap into because I'm intuitive, right? I mean, one of the reasons why I connect with a lot of people who are neurodiverse is because I was that kid. So I know what their pattern of thinking is like. So I know what to kind of ask in order to get different responses out, and then I can gauge, you know, try to distinguish between a hobby and gift. And if it's a gift, this is the part that gets me excited. Like, I get high from my work every day, but I will tap into my personal network to try and connect that individual with an expert in their field. Another example would be an individual who's in high school. I hope he's not going to drop out. I think he's doing better now. But he's Asperger's, started skipping school, smoking weed. Parents are very concerned, loves drawing and animation. My best friend just happens to own an animation studio in Miramichi called LaGuru. So I call my friend Gene and say, hey man, this could be something, could be nothing, but would you mind giving this family a tour? The 16-year-old kid with Asperger's can draw circles around my friend who's a world-class animator. He's worked on Family Guy, Caillou, even though I hate that little Sesame Street, games for every platform you can imagine. The 16-year-old kid with Asperger's who's going to drop out of school because the school doesn't know what to do with him can draw circles around him. Right? We as people need to tap into our personal network to try and help other people, but I can guarantee you, I don't know any other counselor or psychotherapist who does that for their clients. If I can assess and determine somebody's value, I see it as my mission to connect them. I've been fortunate to be on the other end where people have been able to connect me and see the value in that. So, I guess my answer is get in touch with me. and we'll try to figure it out, but it's not, I don't think it's something that just anybody can do. It's an intuitive thing, and I'll be the first to say it's eerie. I mean, I've gone to pool parties where, you know, to a friend's house, and kids with autism just walk right up to me which is strange because a lot of them will not go up to strangers, right? But they will come right to me because there's no smoke screen. I am exactly who I am, and I, right? Whereas there's no bravado or you know, they don't have to worry or wonder about who I am as a person. They know that they can just see it or ask me and I'll tell them. Any other questions? Yes?
So, I come from a point of view that I share a lot of what you're saying. I don't look at ADHD, something I have a fair amount of experience with, as a disability. I just think of it as a different way of being. I like your idea of being a gift. But I encounter a lot of students who have gone and got their label, and they've come back and said, well, I can't do this because I have ADHD or ADD. And I'm like, so what? You need to figure out how to deal with it, not just, well, I've got ADHD, pass me my diploma. And I'm having trouble dealing with students who, once they go and get their label, just say, okay, now what are you going to do for me, instead of being proactive? Now I know how to deal with it, now I know what different things I've got to do, but they don't want to do it, they just want to wait for it, and I don't know how to deal with them. And like I said, I'm not a guy who says, oh, no such thing as learning disabilities. I have a lot of experience with ADHD, and I still struggle with how to deal with some of these students. And once you got the label, they don't want to take ownership of their gift, of their responsibility in how to deal with this. And the other thing I want to bring up, like, sometimes somebody with ADHD, maybe their best place in life is not in the control room of pulp, because that's when it drives in hands. Maybe steering them out of our system or something different is a better answer than trying to fit them into blocks and verticals.
So I'll start with that first. Now, when I'm in my kitchen, I'm cooking, I'm in the zone. It doesn't matter what's happening around me. When you are that passionate about what you do, it doesn't matter what stimuli are around you. Because what happens is we actually will retreat into our own head. And that's actually where we spend a lot of our time. I like to joke and tell people, like, if you want my attention, then what you're saying to me needs to be more interesting than the conversation I'm having in my head. So if you don't have somebody's attention and they're not paying attention, it's more a reflection of it not being interesting enough to them at that time. So I challenge you to try and find a way to make it more interesting to them. And again, I use myself as an example. When I went back to do my master's degree, the first course I took was ethics, and it was boring as all get out. And we got broken up into groups, and we each had our section of ethical guidelines that we had to do a poster board presentation for, and a lot of people just did their regular poster board. It was my first class. I was very fortunate to get into a group with two ladies who had a few classes under their belt, and they let me use my idea for our presentation. I love pop culture, I love movies. So my idea was to come up with ethical dilemmas in different pop culture movies. So we weren't just telling people, we could show them and walk them through the dilemma. That's the context for learning. So if you can find another way or a different way to explain what it is that needs to happen until it clicks. Now, students also need to be independent. If they can recognize what their learning style is, then they need to do that. Now, to go track to your other question of how do you deal with these students, it is a challenge because we are at an age where learned helplessness is at an all-time high. And there is definitely a sense of entitlement. And it is a challenge. And again, for me, again, it's about being the example. You know, like I said, this is my 20th job, right? You've got to go out, you've got to have those experiences, you've got to fail. But one of the biggest things that helped me was actually living in the Northwest Territories, where I went from being a majority of a white population to being the minority and being humbled. You know, we live in a society where a red light tells us when not to drive, a green light tells us when to drive, a red hand tells us when not to walk, but a white van still tells us when to walk. So until somebody has been humbled, it may be hard for them to be able to grasp what it is they actually need to do, and they may be stuck in a place where it's going to be everybody else's fault except theirs. And there's not a lot you can do with that. But I can also tell you, as an individual with ADHD, I haven't found one system that works for me. So when they go to, Resource or whoever it may be, you know, it's like somebody who's only read about being a butcher telling you how to actually cut the meat. So where I come in again is that I'm somebody I've lived this, right? It's a difference between being talked to and talked at. Somebody who hasn't experienced it is talking at someone else at a different level with an expectation that can't be met because they've never had to be there.
And I think we share more than just a nice beer.
It's very, very possible.
Is there a short story to the diagnostic process? Tell us about it.
A short story, like for me?
I know that.
Well, I guess in part of my journey, one of the things I'd like to say is that my parents both came from small villages. My mom's from Hillsborough, my dad was from Salisbury. And, you know, I wasn't assessed as a kid, not for the reasons I'd like to believe, is that I literally would have been on the short bus in life going nowhere in special education at that time. But they didn't have me assessed because to them it would have been a reflection of poor parenting. And this still happens in rural communities where parents don't want to have their kids assessed and they don't want that label because they're more concerned about how people are going to perceive them as parents. And so I went out on my own. I was in college. I went to my family doctor and I said, listen, I can't concentrate. I'd like to get a referral to go get assessed. And my family doctor told me, you're fat and lazy. You need to eat better and you need to exercise. That was the first time I went to see her. The second time, it was actually the same thing. This was my family doctor. And this still happens. I have, I can't not help somebody most of the time. I've been able to maneuver through so many different systems because I've had to. I mean, I've challenged post-secondary education institutions. I filed human rights complaints against the province. I mean, I'm not just somebody who talks about this, I'm somebody who's lived it, right? As a white male, discrimination is not something we often face, but I have. And so again, it's that part of being humbled. But right now, within our education system, you know, a few years ago, what the province did was they let a whole bunch of the school psychologists go, and they hired behavioral interventionists. That didn't work out. They let them go, but they didn't hire back all the psychologists. So they used to be able to say that it would take, you know, around a year for an assessment to occur once a referral was made. They can't give you a date now. So if you don't have private insurance, and even if you do, it's only going to cover a percentage. So again, we have all these kids who are going through school, who are not able to do the work through no fault of their own. Then there are behavioral issues, or they skip and they don't want to go, and then we're scratching our heads and asking ourselves, why? And I know from a parental perspective, you know, reward systems don't work. They don't. I mean, my parents tried everything. There was one semester, well, each semester consisted of 4 classes. One semester I went over 4. Just imagine my parents' delight, right? And so the next semester I was grounded. I mean, there was no car, there was no TV, there was no phone, there was no nothing. And it went from that to them trying to bribe me. $25 for every class, $50, $100, and then it went up to $200 because it didn't, yeah, it's a long story, they came into some money, but the point is, people, it didn't matter. It could have been $1 million. Right? And so the reason why reward systems don't work, especially for neurodiverse kids, is because we, you know, some people might use the term cunning or manipulative. I use the term resourceful. And we really are. We'll find a way. So if there's a sibling involved and the kid with the diagnosis can't get that reward, then how are they going to feel? And then the flip side is, if that kid is actually resourceful, they're going to find a way to get that reward without actually earning it. And then what have you taught them? You've reinforced the negative behavior without intending to do so. So it is very much a challenge to get an assessment here. And even if there is an assessment, you know, and there are a lot of psychologists that I like, and the language that is used has started to shift to more positive language within the assessment process. However, if we're only assessing for deficits, this is the part that gets me. I actually met with the Assistant Deputy Minister of Education about a year ago, and I went in and shared my story, and then part of my language, I just shit on him. You know, we do have gifted kids, but we're not doing anything with them. So why are we not focusing on any form of enrichment? And even within post-secondary, you know, are there enrichment programs for gifted students here? And if not, why not create one? And why not them lead that process? My dream, you know, one of the things I compare us to, we're modern day X-Men. And when you think of X-Men and the relationship with people with disabilities, it's really not that different. People are scared of what they don't understand. I mean, there's one family I was working with where, you know, the kid's on the autism spectrum, and they're trying to get him into school. He doesn't bathe himself, he doesn't brush his own teeth, he doesn't even wipe his own bum. But he can watch 2 different screens at 2 different times to tell you everything that's happening on both and retain all that information. We are forward thinkers. I use myself as an example. I love counseling. The fact that my 2 revenue streams are listening and speaking thrill me to no end. But the minute I have to go back and write that monthly report to justify something that's already happened in my mind, it's like putting cement boots on. So it's finding a way to get through that. And it's a challenge. It's going to be different for every person. But the recommendations that are put on paper are not worth the paper that they're written on, because they're all focused on trying to fix what is perceived to be wrong with a person and not focused on what is identified to be right with them. Yes?
Does that include, I'm thinking of early childhood education. we look at milestones, children's milestones, and if the child hasn't reached a particular milestone, like you had mentioned, red flags, that would be more or less a red flag to us, saying, okay, there might be something going on with this child that we're not sure of, and this child may need some kind of intervention. So we are looking at possibly a deficit, or what people might say call a deficit, but we're not doing it to make the child a disability, but we're still using the milestones. Do you know what I mean?
I do, but these are milestones that are set by a group of people who have sold us on it, correct? I mean, Temple Grandin would say that I don't think she spoke until she was like 3 or 3.5. She has a PhD. She's smarter than the people who would have implemented the system you're talking about. She can go into any airport and tell you how anything in there works that's electronic or mechanical.
Well, my grandson has autism, and he didn't start, well, he started when he was an infant, but he stopped talking when he was 2.
Mm-hmm.
So he didn't start talking again until he was 8 or 9.
Yep.
And he's like, I mean, he's doing really well. But there wouldn't have been if that milestone hadn't been reached at like 2 or a little over, then we wouldn't have been able to get him into see someone about and know that he had autism, and that there might be, easier ways to, like, work with him or talk with him, or, we never stopped talking to him or anything, but,
Yep.
so that red flag enabled us to get him the help he needed with how it works. So what I guess what I'm asking is that we understand that there are differences, but we use those milestones in a way to help us see if there's, and I guess I think that that's important, to be able to see that there's something, that the child might be experiencing something that's different than another child, and then we can step in and work with the child or work with the other children to accept that child. So I think that the milestones help us to, even though they're red flags, they help us to help children and to work with the children and help them to feel like they belong, to not feel outcast.
But it depends on the situation, because you're assuming that they feel like an outcast because as an individual without the disability, when somebody doesn't meet that milestone, there's a sense of pity and a sense of less than, and we need to get that person to catch up to where we think they should be. And I'm not saying that you're wrong. Again, I don't have answers, I have perspectives, but a lot of times what I'll tell parents is that's your shit, not theirs.
Right.
Because that kid may be completely happy. A lot of parents will tell me, I wish that my son or daughter had more friends.
And we see that with my grandson. He's very happy where he is, and that's great. That's wonderful. But there are children who might be left on the sidelines if other children perceive them to be a little bit different. And so we want to check that and include, make sure that everyone belongs and not just.
But I'll challenge you, because again, if we have to teach our kids about inclusion, it means we've already taught them how to exclude. The same generation that's teaching inclusion or preaching it is the same one that has imposed it. So, and I use my kids as an example. My wife's a social worker. My son invited a boy who was much older than him, I believe he was 14, to his birthday party. My son was 8 at the time, and this young man has Down syndrome. Okay? Inclusion isn't a thing that you do, it's a way of being. And so one of my other son's friends came up and said, "Why is that guy here?" My son said, "Because he's my friend," just like you're my friend. Right? So again, it's what is the perception versus the need of the person, right? A lot of these things are imposed on people for the, you know, and it's really tricky because when you think of, I'll frame it this way. For kids, especially kids with disabilities, when you think of what percentage of their day consists of being told that what they're doing is wrong compared to what they're doing is right by the people who are closest to them, the people who should offer the most love and support, conservatively, in my work, it is 75% negative. So this message of you need to get to this milestone reinforces a standard that's not set by the individual, but by set from a place of judgment. And again, it's not to say that these milestones are not necessarily important. Sometimes they are, but I think it's also important to understand that this is from an outside perspective looking in and wanting that kid to be at a level compared to everyone else in their peer group because we think that's where they should be. Where the reality is that kid, although they may be nonverbal, they may not have met other milestones, it's not because they don't exist, because their vocabulary, their mental memory may far surpass any other peer their age. They may be well off it's unreal how smart these kids are. Again, we are all going to have challenges. Mine, math. Math is still my nemesis in a lot of ways. Retaining information, but again, it's my unique understanding of self that helps me. I used to say that I couldn't read or that I didn't read. My confidence is at a point now where I say it's not me, I'm awesome. The publishing world just hasn't done a good enough job of creating a book that holds my attention. Right? But we have all of these resources that are developed for one style of person, but not the style of person who needs it. Somebody up there had a question?
Just an observation, I guess, as instructors, we welcome our students next week, and in our class, we will be given a challenge of special needs. This new student, special needs, like Doug was saying, we don't have the diagnostic skill, we don't have the toolbox to help that person succeed. It becomes more of a hindrance because our schedule says that we have 50 minutes to teach you that, and you got to move along.
Yep.
So the inclusion part socially is probably the right thing to do, but academically,
I don't listen. Anytime inclusion is based on a charity model, it's not the right thing to do. It's actually the wrong thing to do. And I had first-hand experience of having worked for community living as a transition facilitator. Okay, and I've gone through special admissions and I've helped students get in. And I can tell you firsthand that, you know, and this may ruffle some feathers, but this is, you know, I don't want to say low-hanging fruit, but like these are individuals who are going to require more than you can likely provide. But it's through these programs, through these nonprofits, and I challenge them. Like, I've been shunned by every disability-related nonprofit in the province because I actually know what I'm doing and I know what I'm talking about. Disability is a business, right? So I come along to an organization like Community Living and say, you know, your mandate is to promote independence. Without these individuals, you're not sustainable. Without them, there is no you. This is my first business, this is not my last. And I think if anybody's in the helping profession and you don't honestly think you can work yourself out of a job, you have to question what you're doing here to begin with. So, in that situation, you're stuck. And I'm going to say it outright. The students who are there, I mean, we're looking for, in that particular case, students with disabilities who are going to require more than you may be able to give. Whereas if we were flipping it upside down, saying, okay, how do we look at an individual's gifts or assets and using that as the requirement? We wouldn't be having the same conversation. But we're looking at it from a charity-based model. And when I went, so I was consulting for Community Living in Miramichi as an employment coordinator, and the person who was there before me knocked on every door of every business and pissed everybody off. And her pitch to them was, you should employ an individual with a disability because it's the right thing to do. Nope, that's the wrong thing to do. I come from a family of entrepreneurs and I am an entrepreneur. in having conversations with someone and being able to assess and determine their value, I would then go to an entrepreneur and say, this person is going to make you money or they're going to save you money. If this person is not going to be able to do the work you're asking them to do to a certain extent, it is understandable, but there should be other areas in which they're going to be able to exceed your expectations, and if they can't, then they're not a good fit. I think we need to switch from the charity model of doing something because it's the right thing to do, which makes it the absolute wrong thing to do. Yes?
At the beginning of the class, the first class, is it a good idea to talk to students and say how we all learn differently, and if any of you have experienced in the past how we learn differently, just come talk to me and see how we
I don't think so, because let's flip it around. Would you say if anybody learns regularly, would you come and talk to me? Right? There was a poster that came out a few years ago that says, how do you say hi to somebody with a disability? Same way you say hi to everybody else. Right? So I think, I'm not sure what you as instructors get ahead of time. I know within the high school system, the teachers would get a blue sheet from resource. And I know from working with resource teachers that blue sheet was just, there's not enough space. So I'm not sure the information that you get as instructors about your students, but knowing what I do know, I would venture to say that there's not one part in there that talks about their assets and their unique giftedness and how that could be potentially explored and utilized in their learning. And why isn't it, right? Again, we're looking at a deficit-based model of what they can't do instead of asking what they can. They're already being set up for failure. So how do we flip that around? How do we shift it from, okay, let's focus on what you can do. What are your interests and your passions? And then how do we use that in the context of your learning? Yes?
I'm getting from the way you're explaining it that we should seek first to understand who they are and really know who they are and really be interested in who they are. And I think that's what everybody here wants, and if we were students, that would be one from our instructors to understand who we are.
By asking
that, Sean?
Yep, but by asking the simple question, what is your gift? You're going to get all of that information. Like say you're into cars, and I ask you what's your gift, and you say cars, you're just going to go on. I'm not going to be able to get you to shut up. Right? But it's, again, in how we communicate, right? It really is. How many of us are parents? Okay? You ever pick your kids up from daycare, from school, you're driving home, and you're asking them how their day is, but you're not, I'll be honest, you don't really care, you're driving. You're not making eye contact. We're going through the motions, we're trying to fill that silence and fill that void, right? There's a time and a place to ask these questions, and when we ask them when we don't mean it, it's harder for them to come to us when we do. Yes?
Just because in the next week we're going to spend a lot of time getting everybody to fit in, we're going to have all kinds of exercises all week. Just to follow up on the last person that said, what if every instructor was to set aside a period, say 80, 90 minutes, each student by themselves chat with the instructor, instead of at Christmas time when there's a problem, or May when it doesn't look like they're going to graduate, and kind of follow up on what you were saying?
I think you can start before that. I think you can start each one of your classes off, when students are introducing themselves, by asking them what their gift is. But it all starts from you being vulnerable and willing to share your gift. If you're not passionate about what you're doing, and you're not relaying that, and I'm not saying ideally it would come out through what it is you're teaching in a perfect world, but it doesn't mean that we don't all have hobbies and gifts that we do outside of our work. But opening up and sharing a part of that with your students will help them feel more comfortable in sharing that side of them with you. Again, it's a difference between being talked at and talked to, right? We all want to be seen as people. We want people to communicate and feel like they can communicate with us. But we can't set the bar here for them and here for us, right? We can't ask students to do things we're not willing to do ourselves. So you can be vulnerable, you can share that side of yourself, as long as it's appropriate.
I'm not going to cut it off. This is great discussion. I'm not going to cut it off if anyone still has something they'd like to ask. I think this has been a great discussion.
I brought a box of business cards with me. So I will leave quite a few here for anybody who wants to get in touch.
We could include those in the door prizes.
Oh,
You can get one that's not business cards.
but I honestly, like, I'd love for you to get in touch with me, because I can honestly say I don't know anybody who's doing this. Everyone, and part of my challenge is, you know, if I had something that I could package and sell, I know I'd make a ton of money, but I can't do that because I know it's an individualized thing that needs to happen. If there's a package that exists, there may be different people from different places who could access it, but there is no one size fits all. And as long as we're trying to fit everybody into one box, it won't work. But the challenge is organizations spend a lot of money on these packaged products, and they don't work, right? I go back to the fat diet. Anybody know what happened to Atkins? He had a heart attack, right? So again, we just because somebody says it is something. Everybody seen Elf?
Yeah, love Elf.
Okay, so Elf goes in. Buddy goes in. World's best coffee. Guess what? Not world's best coffee. Guess what? Universal design? Not universal. Just because you name it something doesn't make it so. Yes?
My question is for Jody, can we keep up?
Wouldn't that be great?
Yeah, I know.
Now, I'm giving him a gift, but it's a gift I'm going to then turn around and say to him, you know what, I could take that back for you because you told me when you showed up you're going straight to the States.
Is there booze in there?
No, but there is some pure golden homemade maple syrup in there. And I don't know how they feel you importing some maple syrup. Because that might keep him from coming back ever.
You know what? I think smuggling maple syrup is one of those things you can get away with.
You can, okay. Because I will ship it to you.
My wife will find out.
Because I will offer to ship it to you. Thank you so much for coming.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it. I think I'll take my chances.
He doesn't think I'm going to ship it to him.
Oh, no.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate this. This was a great talk, and I have a feeling there are a few people in this room who will be reaching out to you. So that offer of leaving some business cards here, I think is a great idea. And we're about to go. We'll go now and have our nutrition break. So if you have just a few more minutes before you take off on vacation.
Sure.
If you wouldn't mind just sticking around, I bet there are a few people in here who would love to come down and ask you a question.
Yeah, and I'd love to come back. Like, it's, you know, I can honestly say I get high from my work every day. I really do. It's amazing the amount of people who reach out to me from around the world, and I'm able to help with different aspects of their lives, their relationships, and their businesses. So I really enjoy what I do. Thank you very much.